Have you ever felt completely lost? Like you're walking through a maze with no way out, where every step just takes you deeper into the darkness? Imagine waking up one day and realizing that your entire life has been built on quicksand. This is the beginning of the journey of Thomas Wright, a man who had everything the world could offer, but whose heart was empty as a bottomless pit. What happens when someone who has achieved success in the eyes of the world discovers that they have lost their own soul in the process? Follow this story of fall and redemption that will make you rethink the true meaning of wealth and purpose. Thomas Wright was born in a small town in the American Midwest, the son of a pastor and a teacher. She grew up in a simple home, but full of faith and values. His father, Henry Wright, was known for his dedication to the community and for his inspiring sermons at the small local church. His mother, Elizabeth, taught Sunday school and was loved by all. From an early age, Thomas demonstrated a keen intelligence and an ambition that seemed to have no limits. While his parents dreamed that he would follow in his father's footsteps in ministry, Thomas had other plans. He wanted more. He wanted to prove his worth. He wanted the world. At the age of 18, on a partial scholarship and working 3 different jobs, Thomas managed to get into a prestigious East Coast university. There, away from the watchful eyes of his parents and the community that raised him, he began to move away from the values he had learned. "The world is for the smart, Thomas," said his roommate James, heir to a family fortune. "Those who wait for God to solve their problems end up waiting their whole life." Thomas absorbed every word like a sponge. Gradually, the night prayers were replaced by nights of intense study. Visits to the local church gave way to networking at exclusive parties. The Bible that his mother had put in her suitcase was forgotten in the drawer of the nightstand, gathering dust. He graduated with honors and was soon recruited by one of the largest investment firms on Wall Street. His talent for numbers and his unwavering determination have made him quickly rise through the corporate rank. At the age of 30, Thomas Wright was already a respected name in the financial world. His office on the 45th floor overlooked all of Manhattan. His apartment on Fifth Avenue was decorated with expensive works of art that he barely had time to appreciate. His closet was filled with custom-made Italian suits. His silver Porsche was always spotlessly clean, although he rarely drove it, preferring to be driven by his private chauffeur. Thomas had achieved everything he had dreamed of. He had the respect of his colleague, the admiration of his subordinates, and the fear of his competitors. His decisions moved millions of dollars daily. His name appeared in business magazines. Dazzling women vied for his attention. However, something strange began to happen. The more Thomas conquered, the less satisfaction he felt. Each new acquisition, each new recognition, each new achievement brought an increasingly ephemeral joy. At night, alone in his luxurious apartment, Thomas found himself looking out the window at the city that never sleeps, feeling an inexplicable emptiness. The lights of New York shone outside, but inside there was only darkness. Calls from his parents became increasingly rare, not because they had given up on their son, but because Thomas was always too busy to attend. Christmas, Easter, birthdays, all important dates were celebrated with co-workers or alone, never with the family. "We're proud of you, son," his father would say in the voicemails Thomas rarely heard until the end. "But remember that true success is not measured by what you have, but by what you are." Thomas deleted these messages with an angry sigh. His father didn't understand the real world, he thought. He didn't understand what it took to win. It was on an ordinary Tuesday that Thomas's world began to fall apart. He was in an important meeting when his assistant hurriedly entered the room. "Mr. Wright, it's an emergency." His mother called several times. Thomas frowned, annoyed by the interruption. "Tell me I'll come back later." "Sir, she said it's about your father. He had a heart attack." Time seemed to freeze. Thomas felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. For the first time in years, Wall Street, the millionaire contracts, the important negotiation, all of this seemed insignificant. He flew to his hometown that same afternoon. The local hospital was small and modest, so different from the elite medical centers Thomas attended in New York. His mother was sitting in the waiting room, looking much smaller and more fragile than he remembered. "Thomas," she whispered, standing up with difficulty. You came. There was surprise in his voice, which made Thomas feel a pang of guilt. When was the last time he had returned home? 3 years? 4? How is he? Asked Thomas, unable to hug his mother as he should. Stable, but she did not complete the sentence. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said it all. In the days that followed, Thomas remained at his father's bedside. Henry Wright, once a strong and vibrant man, was now connected to pipes and machines. His breathing was weak, his face pale. Thomas tried working remotely, but for the first time, his heart wasn't in the numbers and chart. He was there, in that hospital room, with the man he had practically abandoned in his quest for success. On the third day, as Thomas checked his emails in the hospital hallway, his phone rang. It was James Peterson, the company's CEO. Thomas, we need to talk, Peterson said, his tone serious. There were some irregularities in their last transactions. Thomas felt a chill down his spine. What kind of irregularities? The kind that attracts the attention of the SEC. We're conducting an internal audit. Until then, you're temporarily away. The news fell like a bomb. Thomas knew exactly what Peterson was talking about. In recent years, under pressure to constantly exceed his own goals, he had begun to cut some edges. Nothing explicitly illegal, he told himself. Only shortcuts, privileged information here, data manipulation there, small ethical deviations that, added together, formed a disturbing pattern. He hung up the phone and leaned against the wall, feeling dizzy. In a matter of days, her perfect life had turned into a nightmare. His father was dying, and now his career, the thing he had dedicated his entire adult life to, was threatened. That night, alone in his old childhood bedroom, Thomas found the old Bible he had left behind when he left for university. Dust was gathering on the leather cover. He opened it at random and his eyes fell on a passage. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? The words hit him like a punch in the stomach. That was exactly what he had done. He won the world, but lost his soul in the process. The next morning, Thomas received a call from the hospital. His father's condition had worsened drastically during the night. When he arrived at the room, doctors were performing resuscitation maneuvers. Thomas watched, paralyzed, as they tried to bring his father back to life. Time of death, 9:47 a.m., the doctor announced finally in a solemn voice. Thomas felt as if he had been shot. His father was gone, and he had not even had a chance to say goodbye properly, to say he loved him, to ask forgiveness for the years of absence. The funeral was held 3 days later. The small church where his father had preached for decades was packed. People Thomas hadn't seen since childhood came to pay their last respects. They all had stories about how Henry Wright had touched their lives, how he had been there for the most difficult times, how his unwavering faith had inspired the entire community. Thomas heard these stories with a lump in his throat. Who would speak of him like that when his time came? Who knew Thomas Wright had made a difference in their lives? What legacy was he building, besides a robust bank account and an impressive resume? After the funeral, as the house emptied of visitors, Thomas found his mother sitting on the porch, looking out into the sunset. He always believed in you, you know, she said softly. Even when you stopped calling, even when we went years without seeing your face, he said you'd find your way back. Thomas felt warm tears streaming down his face. I was a bad son. No, she replied, taking his hand. You just got lost for a while, but there is still time to find its way. That night, Thomas received another call from New York. He was his lawyer. The situation is worse than we thought, Thomas. The SEC is opening a formal investigation. There is substantial evidence against you. We are talking about possible criminal charges. Thomas's world, already shaken, fell apart completely. In a matter of weeks, he went from being one of Wall Street's most respected executives to a man under federal investigation. His name, once mentioned with admiration in business magazines, now appeared in the headlines for very different reasons. Subscribe now. Activate the notification bell. The company formally fired him. His supposed friends stopped answering his call. His luxurious apartment, the car, the artwork, everything was frozen as part of the investigation. Thomas Wright, the financial prodigy, the man who had everything, now had nothing. 6 months after his father's death, Thomas was unrecognizable. The man who once wore impeccable Italian suits now wore simple, worn-out clothes. Her hair, once perfectly cut, was long and unkempt. His eyes, which had once shone with ambition, were now dull and tired. He had pleaded guilty to several charges in a deal with prosecutors. In exchange for his cooperation in investigating broader corrupt practices on Wall Street, he received a relatively relatively light sentence, 2 years in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. The federal prison where Thomas was serving his sentence was a world completely different from anything he had ever known. The gray walls, the rigid routines, the total loss of privacy and autonomy, all of this was a constant reminder of how he had fallen. For the first few weeks, Thomas barely left his cell except when he had to. He avoided contact with the other inmates. He refused to participate in the activities offered by the institution. He spent hours lying in his bed, staring at the ceiling, mentally reliving every decision that had led him there. It was during this period of self-imposed isolation that Thomas began to truly reflect on his life. Without the distractions of the outside world, without the constant noise of emails, calls, and meetings, he was forced to confront the person he had become. "Wright," a guard called one day. "You have a visitor." Thomas was surprised. Who would come to visit him? His mother was too ill to make the long journey to prison. His former co-workers had abandoned him. His superficial relationships with women had dissolved by the time headlines about his downfall began to circulate. In the living room, she met a middle-aged man whom she did not immediately recognize. "Thomas," said the man, extending his hand. "I don't know if you remember me. I'm Michael Donovan. I was a deacon in your father's church." Thomas shook the man's hand, confused. "What brings you here, Mr. Donovan?" "Your father," Michael replied simply. "Before he died, he asked me to look for him in case things got tough." He knew, Thomas. Somehow, he knew you were on a dangerous path. Thomas felt a lump in his throat. Even on his deathbed, his father had thought of him, had worried about his well-being. "I'm here to tell you that you're not alone," Michael continued. "The community still remembers the boy you were, and we believe in the man you can become." Michael began to visit Thomas regularly. He brought news from his hometown, talked about the church his father had led for so long, shared stories Thomas had never heard about Henry Wright's life and ministry. Gradually, these visits became a beacon of hope in Thomas's dark existence. He began to wait anxiously for them, counting the days between one meeting and another. On one of these visits, Michael brought a gift, a new Bible. "Your father wanted you to have this," he said, handing the book to Thomas. "He bought it for you just before he died." Thomas opened the Bible with trembling hands. On the first page, there was a handwritten message from his father. "My beloved son, it is never too late to start over. The way back home is always open. With everlasting love, Father." That night, alone in his cell, Thomas cried as he had not cried since childhood. Tears of regret, of shame, but also of relief. For the first time in years, he felt something break within him, not of destruction, but of liberation, as if a wall he had built around his heart was finally crumbling. In the days that followed, Thomas began to read the Bible that his father had given him. Words he had memorized as a child but forgotten over the years now took on new meaning. Stories of fall and redemption, of sin and forgiveness, of death and rebirth, all seemed to speak directly to his situation. Slowly, Thomas began to change. He left his cell more. He talked to other inmates. He signed up for the prison's educational program, offering to help other prisoners with basic math and finance. "You have a gift for teaching, Wright," one of the instructors commented after watching him explain budgeting concepts to a group of inmates. "Have you thought about doing something with this when you leave here?" Thomas had never considered using his knowledge to help others. On Wall Street, his skills only served to generate more money, more power, more status. The idea that he could use the same talent to empower people who really needed it was revolutionary. As the months passed, Thomas became more and more involved in the programs offered by the prison. He joined the Bible study group, participated in counseling sessions. He began to write regularly to his mother, long and sincere letters where he expressed his regret and his desire for change. In one of these letters, he wrote, "Mother, I spent years chasing what I thought was success, only to find that I was chasing a mirage. Now, within these walls, I'm finally starting to see what really mattered. Father was right all along. True success is not measured by what we have, but by who we are and what we give to others." 18 months after his entry into prison, Thomas received unexpected news. Due to his exemplary behavior and the overcrowding of the prison system, he would be released early, with the remainder of his sentence converted to community service. When he walked out of the prison gates, Thomas was no longer the same man he had entered. Outwardly, he looked older, more worn, but internally, something had fundamentally changed. Where once there was unbridled ambition, there was now purpose. Where once there was pride, there was now humility. Where once there was emptiness, there was now now renew faith. His mother was waiting for him outside, next to Michael Donovan. Elizabeth Wright looked more fragile than ever, but her eyes sparkled at the sight of her son. "Welcome back, Thomas," she said, hugging him with surprising strength for someone so small and frail. Thomas returned to his hometown, to the house where he grew up. The circumstances of his fall had been widely reported, and he feared the reception he would receive from the community. To his surprise, he found not condemnation, but compassion. "His father taught all of us about forgiveness and second chances," explained Pastor Johnson, who had taken over the church after Henry Wright's death. "It would be hypocrisy not to practice what he preached for so many years." Thomas began to fulfill his community service in the local church, helping to organize the institution's finances and creating a financial education program for low-income families. He used his knowledge of Wall Street no longer to enrich himself, but to empower people who had never had access to this kind of information. "Most of these families live paycheck to paycheck," Thomas explained to Pastor Johnson as they developed the program. "Not because they don't know how to manage money, but because they never had the opportunity to learn. The financial system is deliberately complicated to keep people dependent and in debt." The program started modestly, with only 5 families. Thomas taught basic concepts: how to create a budget, how to avoid debt traps, how to save even with limited resources, how to plan for the future. "You're changing lives, Thomas," his mother commented after one of the sessions. "Your dad would be so proud." Those words meant more to Thomas than any millionaire bonus he had ever received on Wall Street. Over time, the program grew. More families signed up. Other churches in the area began to take an interest. Thomas was invited to speak at local schools about financial literacy and the dangers of greed. At one of these lectures, Thomas met Sarah Mitchell, a high school math teacher. Sarah had grown up in difficult circumstances. The daughter of a single mother, raised in a poor neighborhood, the first in her family to attend university. She understood firsthand the importance of financial education to break cycles of poverty. "What you're doing is important," she told Thomas after her talk. "But what if we could reach these young people even earlier, before they form bad financial habits?" Together, Thomas and Sarah developed a financial literacy curriculum for teenagers. The program combined practical math with lessons on ethics, generosity, and purpose, values that Thomas had rediscovered on his journey. While working together, Thomas and Sarah developed a friendship that gradually deepened into something more. Sarah was unimpressed with her Wall Street path. In fact, she valued more the man he had become after his fall. "We all make mistakes, Thomas," she said one evening as they walked through the city park. "What matters is what we do next." With Sarah, Thomas experienced something he had never known in his previous relationships: a genuine connection based on shared values and mutual respect, not status or appearances. As his financial literacy program grew, Thomas began to receive attention from local media. A regional newspaper published an article titled "From Prison to Redemption: Former Wall Street Executive Transforms Lives Through Financial Education." The article caught the attention of a former colleague of Thomas's, David Chen, who had left Wall Street to found a nonprofit focused on microfinance for underserved communities. "Thomas," David said on the phone, "I read about the work you're doing. It's impressive. I'm building a team to expand our microcredit program to rural areas. I would like to talk about a possible collaboration." David's proposal represented an opportunity to significantly amplify the impact of Thomas's work. It didn't offer even a fraction of the salary he earned on Wall Street, but that didn't matter anymore. Thomas had discovered a far greater richness in service to others. 3 years after his release from prison, Thomas Wright's life had transformed in ways he could never have imagined during his days on Wall Street. The metamorphosis was not only external, visible in his simpler lifestyle and foundation work, but deeply internal, reflected in every aspect of his being, in every decision he made, in every relationship he cultivated. Thomas and Sarah had been married in an intimate and meaningful ceremony at the church, where their father had preached for decades. The wooden building, with its colorful stained glass windows and time-worn benches, was filled not with celebrities or major figures in the financial world, but with people whose lives had been touched by the couple. Families who participated in the financial literacy programs, colleagues at the clinic where Sarah worked as a nurse, members of the congregation who had known Thomas since he was a child. Pastor Johnson, who had taken over the church after Henry Wright's death, led the ceremony with words that perfectly captured the couple's journey. "We are here to celebrate not only the union of two hearts, but the transformative power of true love, a love that sees beyond appearances, that endures through trials principles, who believes in the possibility of redemption even when the world has given up. Elizabeth Wright, now using a wheelchair due to health problems that worsened after her husband's death, radiated happiness as she watched her son find not only purpose but also genuine love. Her eyes, though weakened by age, lit with tears of joy as she watched Thomas and Sarah exchange vows that spoke not of material wealth or conventional success, but of commitment to shared values, service to others, and faithfulness through whatever challenges life might bring. "My son," she whispered, as Thomas knelt beside his chair after the ceremony, "your father is watching this from somewhere. He always knew you'd find your way back." Thomas held his mother's frail hands, feeling the weight of her word. "Took me too long," he said softly. "Subscribe now. Activate the notification bell." Elizabeth touched his face with trembling fingers. "It's never too late to do the right thing, Thomas. Your father always said that, remember?" Those simple words, an echo of his father's teachings that he had ignored for so long, became a mantra for Thomas in the years that followed, guiding him through difficult decisions and moments of doubt. The financial education program that Thomas had started as part of his community service flourished beyond his initial expectation. What had started with 5 families in a church room now served hundreds of people in dozens of communities. The curriculum had evolved from basic budgeting concepts to include modules on ethical investing, social entrepreneurship, and advocacy for economic justice. Thomas found that his Wall Street experience, which he had once used to accumulate personal wealth, now served as a powerful tool to demystify the financial system for people who had been systematically excluded from it. He could explain complex financial products in simple terms, reveal the pitfalls hidden in predatory credit offers, and teach defensive strategies against the same tactics he himself had employed in his previous life. "You're essentially translating from one world to another," Sarah remarked one evening, after watching Thomas conduct a particularly effective session on how to negotiate with creditors. "You speak both languages, that of Wall Street and that of ordinary people struggling to make ends meet." Thomas had never thought of it that way, but Sarah was right. His fall had put him in a unique position, able to navigate between worlds that rarely communicated effectively. It was an unexpected gift born of his failure, a skill he now dedicated to empowering the vulnerable rather than exploiting them. Partnering with David Chen's organization has significantly expanded the reach of Thomas's work. Together, they developed microcredit programs tailored specifically for rural communities and small towns that had been devastated by deindustrialization and the financial crisis. Not only did these programs provide seed capital for small businesses, but they also provided ongoing mentorship, technical support, and connections to broader markets. In one of these communities, a former mining town in West Virginia that had suffered decades of economic decline, Thomas met Earl Jenkins, a former third-generation coal miner who dreamed of starting a solar energy cooperative. "People think it doesn't make sense," Earl explained during their first meeting. "A coal miner advocating solar power, but I saw what dependence on a single industry did to our city. I saw what resource extraction did to our land. I want something different for my grandchildren." Thomas was deeply touched by Earl's vision, his willingness to transcend political and cultural divisions in pursuit of a more sustainable future for his community. He worked tirelessly to structure a financing package that combined microloans, government subsidies, and socially responsible private investment. 18 months later, the Appalachia Solar Energy Cooperative was operational, employing 12 local people and providing affordable electricity to more than 100 homes. The project became a model for other communities in transition, demonstrating how economic justice and environmental sustainability could work together. "You know what's most amazing about this?" said Earl to Thomas during the cooperative's opening ceremony. "It's not just the energy we're generating or the jobs we're creating. It is hope. People here were resigned to decline, convinced that the best they could do was hold on to what they had for as long as possible. Now they're talking about the future again. Stories like this, of communities rediscovering their collective power, of individuals finding new paths to prosperity, became the fuel that fueled Thomas's work. Every success, no matter how small, served as tangible proof that change was possible, that broken systems could be repaired, that damaged lives could be rebuilt. Subscribe now. Activate the notification bell. At home, Thomas and Sarah created an environment that reflected their shared value. His home, while modest compared to the mansion Thomas had owned in his Wall Street days, was welcoming and open. Weekly dinners brought together an eclectic mix of people, participants in the foundation's programs, co-workers, church members, visitors passing through town. Conversations around the table often continued late into the night, touching on everything from local politics to theology, from community development strategies to family recipes. Our house is like a microcosm of the world we're trying to create, Sarah once remarked. Diverse, inclusive, focused on genuine relationships rather than status or appearances. The arrival of their first child, Henry, named after Thomas's father, further deepened the couple's commitment to their values. Thomas, who had lost so many years with his own parents due to his pursuit of material success, was determined to be fully present for his son. "I want him to grow up knowing that his worth doesn't come from what he achieves or possesses," Thomas told Sarah as they held their newborn son. "I want him to understand from the beginning that the true purpose of life is to love and serve others." 2 years later, the family grew again with the birth of Elizabeth, named after Thomas's mother. Little Elizabeth had Sarah's expressive eyes and Thomas's determined stubbornness, a combination that promised both challenges and joys in the years to come. Motherhood and fatherhood brought new dimensions to Thomas and Sarah's transformation. They found that teaching their children values required them to live them even more authentically and consistently. It wasn't enough to talk about generosity. They needed to demonstrate it in their daily choices. It was not enough to preach about compassion. They needed to practice it even in the most challenging circumstances. "Children have a foolproof radar for hypocrisy," Thomas commented after a particularly challenging situation with Henry, then 4, who had questioned why some people had big houses while others had no homes at all. "They force us to confront the contradictions in our own lives." These contradictions became increasingly apparent as Thomas's work gained national recognition. Invitations to speak at prestigious universities, participate in panels at important conferences, and contribute to influential publications began to arrive with increasing frequency. The media, always on the lookout for stories of redemption, showed renewed interest in his journey. Thomas navigated this attention with deliberate caution. He accepted opportunities that allowed him to amplify important messages about economic justice and financial reform, but he turned down those that seemed more interested in turning his personal story into entertainment or superficial inspiration. "I don't want to be turned into some kind of secular saint," he explained to Sarah after turning down a lucrative offer to write a self-help book based on his experience. "My story is not about personal overcoming or individual success. It's about acknowledging the damage I've done and trying to repair it. It's about broken systems that need to be transformed." That perspective, the refusal to separate personal transformation from systemic change, distinguished Thomas from many others who had left Wall Street to pursue more ethical paths. He insisted that his own redemption could not be complete as long as the systems he had helped perpetuate continued to do harm. It was this conviction that led him to accept an invitation to testify before a congressional committee investigating predatory practices in the financial sector. Many of his friends and counselors, including Pastor Johnson, have expressed concern about the risks of exposing themselves in this way. "You have built something beautiful here, Thomas," said Pastor Johnson during a long conversation in his office. "The foundation is doing vital work. His family is flourishing. Are you sure you want to risk all this by entering the political arena?" Thomas considered the question carefully. "I don't see it as a choice, Pastor. If I remain silent about what I know, about how the system actually works, about the specific ways it is manipulated to benefit the few at the expense of the many, then I am not really living the truth that I claim to embrace." His testimony before the committee was powerful precisely because it was not theoretical or abstract. Thomas spoke with detailed inside knowledge about how complex financial products were deliberately designed to obscure risk, how corporate incentives encouraged reckless behavior, and how regulators were systematically weakened through lobbying and revolving doors between government and the private sector. "The problem is not just a few bad apples," he concluded in his testimony. "The problem is a system that rewards behavior that should be discouraged and punishes virtues that should be celebrated. Until we fundamentally address this, we will only be treating symptoms symptoms, not the underlying disease. Thomas's testimony generated headlines and controversy. Former Wall Street colleagues denounced him as a traitor. Some financial reformers criticized it for not going far enough. Politicians on both sides of the aisle tried to use his words to advance partisan agenda. Amid the ensuing media firestorm, Thomas stood firm in his central message that economic justice was not a matter of left or right, but a moral imperative that transcended conventional political division. We're talking about basic human dignity, he explained in a PBS interview that went viral, about communities that can support family, about a financial system that serves the real economy instead of dominating it. These should not be partisan issues. The resulting national attention from his testimony has brought both challenges and opportunities to the Wright Foundation. Some conservative donors withdrew their support, uncomfortable with what they perceived as political activism. But new supporters emerged, including several former Wall Street executives who had been quietly uncomfortable with the direction of the financial industry and saw in Thomas a model for their own transition to more meaningful work. One of those executives was Catherine Zhao, a former director of a large hedge fund who had left her career after a crisis of conscience similar to Thomas's. Catherine has not only become a significant donor to the foundation, but also a crucial strategic partner, helping to develop new programs focused specifically on women entrepreneurs in low-income communities. What drew me to your work, Catherine explained during her first meeting with Thomas, is that you're not just trying to help people navigate an unfair system. You're actively working to transform the system itself. Partnering with Catherine exemplified an important dimension of Thomas's transformation, his growing willingness to collaborate with others who shared his values, even when they came from very different backgrounds or brought different perspectives. He had learned that true change rarely comes from individual heroic efforts, but from collective movements that bring together diverse skills, experiences, and resources. This lesson was reinforced when Thomas's mother, Elizabeth, suffered a severe stroke that left her in need of constant care. Thomas and Sarah immediately brought her to live with them, rearranging her home and routines to accommodate her need. In the months that followed, Thomas experienced firsthand the challenges faced by millions of Americans. Caring for elderly or sick loved ones, the physical and emotional exhaustion, the complexities of navigating the healthcare system, the difficult financial decisions, the precarious balance between competing responsibilities. "I don't know how low-income families do this," he told Sarah one night after a particularly difficult day coordinating medical appointments and dealing with insurance companies. "Even with all of our resources and connections, it's still almost impossible." This personal experience directly informed the Foundation's next big initiative, a comprehensive support program for family caregivers that combined direct financial assistance, resource navigation, peer support groups, and advocacy for more humane family leave and long-term care policy. "We're building the program that I needed myself," Thomas explained to the Foundation's board members. "One that recognizes that caring for loved ones is not an individual crisis, but a social responsibility that we all share." The caregiver program exemplified how Thomas's transformation had become increasingly holistic, integrating personal, relational, professional, and political dimensions into a coherent vision of social change. He no longer separated his life into distinct compartments, but saw each aspect as part of an interconnected whole. This integration was manifested even in their physical appearance. The Thomas of Wall Street had been meticulously polished, always wearing perfectly fitted, expensive suits, perfectly cut hair, posture projecting confidence and dominance. The Thomas of now wore simple, comfortable clothes, grew his hair a little longer, and moved with a combination of humility and purpose that reflected his inner transformation. "You look more comfortable in your own skin," Michael Donovan observed during one of his regular visits. "More authentic." Thomas smiled. "I think I've finally stopped trying to be someone I'm not." This newfound authenticity allowed Thomas to develop deeper and more meaningful relationships than he had ever experienced in his previous life. Not only did he listen to people more genuinely, but he also allowed himself to be truly known by them. him, sharing not only his successes and visions, but also his doubts, fear, and ongoing struggles. With Sarah especially, he cultivated an intimacy based on mutual vulnerability and shared growth. They did not hide their imperfections from each other, but openly acknowledged them and worked together to overcome them. "You make me a better person," Thomas told her on their third wedding anniversary. "Not because you demand perfection, but because you love me completely while still challenging me to grow." Sarah smiled, taking his hand. "It's a two-way street, you know." Her courage in facing her past and rebuilding her life inspired me to examine my own fears and limitations. We are on this journey together. This partnership, grounded in love, mutual respect, and shared commitment to higher values, became the cornerstone of Thomas's transformed life. With Sarah by his side, he found the strength to face challenges that would have seemed insurmountable on his own. One of those challenges came when Elizabeth Wright passed away peacefully in her sleep, 3 years after coming to live with Thomas and Sarah. Although his death was not unexpected, given his fragile health, it still struck Thomas deep. She had been his last living link to his childhood, to the man his father had been, to the family that had existed before his ambition destroyed everything. During the funeral, held in the same church where his father had been honored years earlier, Thomas felt the full weight of his journey. As his mother's coffin was lowered to the earth next to his father's grave, he experienced not only loss, but also a strange sense of completeness, as if one cycle was closing, allowing another to begin. "They never gave up on me," he told Sarah as they left the cemetery. "Even when I gave up on myself, they continued to believe that I would find my way back." "And you found it," Sarah replied softly. "Yes," said Thomas, looking at the small children who walked in front of them, holding hands. "And now it's my responsibility to keep that path open for Henry and Elizabeth, and for everyone else who might need to find it as well." After the funeral, Thomas found a letter among his mother's belongings. It was addressed to him, written shortly after his release from prison. "My dear Thomas," the letter read, "your father and I always knew you had a special purpose. When you walked away, we kept believing. When you fell, we kept praying. Now, seeing the man you have become, my heart overflows with joy. You lost the world, but you found your soul. There is no greater gift to a mother than to see her child walk in truth. With eternal love, Mother." His mother's words crystallized for Thomas the essence of his transformation. He had, in fact, lost the world, the power, the prestige, the material wealth that he had once valued above all else. But in that loss, he had found something infinitely more precious: his true identity, his authentic purpose, his capacity to love and be genuinely loved. Thomas folded the letter carefully and kept it in his Bible, the same one his father had given him in prison. Those words would be his treasure, his reminder that the true inheritance his parents left him was not material, but spiritual. In the weeks that followed, Thomas and Sarah made an important decision. They would sell the Wright home and use the money to establish a foundation in memory of Henry and Elizabeth. The Wright Foundation would be dedicated to promoting financial education and microfinance in underserved communities, continuing and expanding the work Thomas had started. Her parents left a legacy of service and faith, Sarah said as they discussed plans for the foundation. "Now you're honoring that legacy in a way they could never have." "Imagine," Thomas nodded, moved. "I spent years trying to prove my worth through material success. Now I understand what my father always said. The true value is not in what we achieve, but in how we serve." The formal creation of the Wright Foundation marked not the end, but a new chapter in Thomas's ongoing transformation. It was an acknowledgement that the journey he had begun in a prison cell was not just about his personal redemption, but about creating structures and systems that would allow others to find their own paths to a life of meaning and purpose. As Thomas watched the plaque being installed at the entrance to the modest building that would house the foundation's headquarters, a former community bank that had closed during the financial crisis, now renovated, he reflected on the poetic irony of his life. The man who had once used his financial talent to exploit vulnerable communities now dedicated that same talent to strengthening them. The building that had once symbolized the extraction of wealth would now serve as a hub for its redistribution and recirculation. "It's a beautiful symmetry," Sarah commented, as if reading her thoughts. Thomas smiled smiled, taking her hand. I think that's what transformation really means. Not just changing who we are, but redirecting what we do to align with who we should have been all along. The simple sign at the entrance captured this philosophy in a nutshell. Right foundation, building bridges for opportunity and justice. Underneath was inscribed the verse that had guided Thomas through his journey of transformation. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? One autumn afternoon, 5 years after his release from prison, Thomas received an unexpected call. It was James Peterson, the former CEO of the Wall Street firm where he had worked. "Thomas," Peterson said, his voice sounding tired, "I know I'm probably the last person you'd want to hear from." Thomas felt a whirlwind of emotion. Peterson had been quick to abandon it when the troubles began. It had been ruthless in its public condemnation of Thomas, using him as a scapegoat for practices that were endemic to the company. "What can I do for you, James?" asked Thomas, keeping his voice neutral. "Actually," Peterson replied, "it's about what I can do for you, or rather for his work. I've been following what you've been doing with the Wright Foundation. Is impressive." Thomas was surprised. He never imagined that his former boss was aware of his current activity. "I'm retiring, Thomas," Peterson continued. "After everything that happened, the investigations, the scandals, the company was never the same. I'm walking away with a considerable fortune and, well, I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately." Peterson explained that he wanted to make a substantial donation to the Wright Foundation, enough to expand its programs nationally and establish an endowment fund that would ensure its continuity for decades. "Why?" asked Thomas directly. "Why now? Why us?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Because you've done something that few of us can, Thomas. You fell, but you rose like a better man. You turned your failure into something meaningful." Peterson paused. "And maybe, somehow, by supporting his work, I can begin to correct some of the mistakes that I made." Thomas discussed the proposal with Sarah and the foundation's board. Peterson's donation would allow them to reach communities they had never dreamed of reaching, but there were ethical issues to consider. The money came from the same system that Thomas had abandoned, a system that often prioritized profits over people. After much thought and prayer, Thomas came to a decision. "I would accept the donation, but with condition. Peterson would not only contribute financially, but also become personally involved in the foundation's program. He would use his influence and connections to open doors on Wall Street, creating a program that would recruit financial executives to mentor young people from underserved communities. Subscribe now. Activate the notification bell. I don't just want your money, James," Thomas explained during a lunch where they finalized the details. "I want your time, your experience, your commitment. True transformation comes not just from financial resources, but from genuine relationships." Peterson, to Thomas's surprise, readily agreed. "You're offering me something I've been looking for my whole career, Thomas. Real meaning." The partnership between Thomas Wright and James Peterson caused a stir in the financial world. Headlines such as "Unlikely Alliance," "Wall Street's former rivals join forces to fight financial inequality," appeared in major publications. The Bridges to the Future program, as it was called, recruited finance executives to spend a gap year working directly with underserved communities, teaching financial skills and helping to develop local small businesses. At the same time, talented young people from these communities were given scholarships to study finance and economics, with guaranteed internships at reputable financial institutions. "We're creating a virtuous cycle," Thomas explained in interviews. "Executives gain perspective and purpose, while communities gain knowledge and opportunities. It's an exchange that benefits everyone." In one of these interviews, for a documentary about social impact initiatives, Thomas was asked about his extraordinary journey. "If you could go back in time and avoid your downfall, the arrest, the public disgrace, would you?" the interviewer asked. Thomas reflected for a moment before answering. "It's a tough question," he said finally. "I cannot glorify the mistakes I have made or the damage I have caused, but I also cannot deny that it was precisely through this fall that I found my true purpose. Sometimes we need to lose everything to figure out what really matters." The interview aired nationally and generated a wave of interest in the work of the Wright Foundation. People from all over the country began reaching out to Thomas, sharing their own stories of falling and redemption, asking how they could get involved. Among these contacts was a surprising invitation. The prestigious Princeton University wanted Thomas to give a lecture at the graduation of the economics and finance class. "We want our graduates to hear a different perspective before they enter the corporate world," the dean explained over the phone. "Someone who has seen seen both sides of the coin and can speak authentically about ethics, purpose, and the true meaning of success. Thomas humbly accepted the invitation. The idea of speaking at such a renowned institution, the kind of place he would have considered the pinnacle of success in his previous life, now represented an opportunity to sow transformative ideas in the minds of future financial leaders. The night before the lecture, Thomas couldn't sleep. Sitting in the hotel's living room, he reviewed his notes while Sarah slept in the room. His thoughts drifted back to the ambitious young man he had been, leaving his small town with dreams of conquering Wall Street. How would that young Thomas react if he could see the man he would become? Would you be disappointed by the loss of wealth and status, or would he understand the far greater value he had found? Thomas took out his Bible, the same one his father had given him years ago, and opened it. His eyes fell on a verse that seemed to speak directly to his heart at that moment. For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? The next morning, Thomas took the podium in front of hundreds of brilliant graduates, eager to launch their careers in the financial world. He looked at the young, ambitious faces, so similar to what he had been, and began to speak. I am here today not as an example of success, but as a testimony of redemption, he said. You are about to enter a world that will define success in terms of salaries, bonuses, titles, and power. A world that will tell them that their value as a person is directly tied to the value of their investment portfolio. Thomas paused, looking directly at the graduates. I'm here to tell you that there's a different definition of success, one that is not measured in dollars, but in lives touched, not in accumulated assets, but in shared value, not in power exercised over others, but in service rendered to others. As he spoke, Thomas saw something in the eyes of these young people, a spark of recognition, as if a deep truth was resonating in their hearts. You have an extraordinary gift, he continued. Knowledge, education, opportunities that most people will never have. The question is not whether you will succeed. I am sure you will be. The question is, what kind of success will you seek, and at what cost? At the end of his lecture, the audience rose to its feet in a spontaneous ovation. Many students had tears in their eyes. Some older professors nodded in silent approval. In the days that followed, Thomas received dozens of emails from graduates who had been deeply impacted by his words. Many expressed a desire to get involved with the Wright Foundation or to find ways to integrate social purpose into their future financial careers. One of these emails in particular touched Thomas deeply. It was from a young woman named Emily Chen, the valedictorian and the daughter of immigrants who had sacrificed everything to give her a quality education. Mr. Wright, she wrote, before your lecture I was sure of my path, to get the most prestigious and well-paid job possible to honor my parents' sacrifices. I now realize that I can honor them in a much deeper way, by using my privileges to create opportunities for others just as they did for me. I would love to learn more about how I can be a part of the change you represent. Thomas invited Emily for a summer internship at the Wright Foundation before she started her job at a major investment bank. She accepted immediately. Emily was just the first of many young talents who found in the Wright Foundation not only a place to serve, but a new vision of how their financial careers could positively impact the world. As the foundation's work expanded, Thomas began receiving invitations to speak at other universities, corporate conferences, and even international forums on ethical finance and inclusive economic development. At one of these conferences in Geneva, Thomas met representatives of the United Nations who were developing global financial inclusion initiative. Impressed by the Wright Foundation's model, they invited Thomas to join a high-level advisory committee that would help shape economic development policies for developing nations. I never imagined that my journey would bring me here, Thomas remarked to Sarah as they walked along the shores of Lake Geneva after the meeting. From a prison cell to a UN committee, Sarah shook his hand. Maybe it's precisely because of this journey that you have so much to offer. You know the extremes, wealth and poverty, success and failure, fall and redemption. It gives you a perspective that few have. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. You know what's most ironic? When I was on Wall Street chasing power and status, I dreamed of one day influencing global policy. Now I'm doing just that, but with a completely different purpose. Thomas Wright had lost everything: his fortune, his reputation, his parents, but he found something far more valuable in the process: his soul. After years of building a new life dedicated to helping others, he finally believed he had left his dark past behind. But what happens when the secrets you thought were buried come back to the surface? In the next part of this extraordinary journey, Thomas will face his toughest test when an investigative journalist discovers a devastating truth. The man who reached out to Thomas in his darkest moment, who guided him back to faith and redemption, was, unbeknownst to either of them, one of the many victims of Thomas's predatory practices on Wall Street. Now everything he rebuilt is at risk: its foundation, your family, your redemption. Thomas Wright will have to face the most difficult question of all: is true redemption possible when the full price of your sins has not yet been paid? Don't miss the conclusion of this powerful story of fall and redemption. Sign up now, turn on the notification bell, and get ready to find out if a man can truly find forgiveness when faced with the most painful consequences of his past. Part 2 of Antiphon, A Song of Redemption, will arrive tomorrow, a story that will make you question the true meaning of repentance, forgiveness, and the transformative power of grace.